Salutations, our Morbid maggots! Joker here, welcoming you back to the Morbid Vale. Today we're finishing off the spooky season with yet another macabre character build. If you haven't seen our previous build, the Bal Spawn, then click the pop-up now to view it.
Now before we get caught in the webs of our character build, we wanted to give a shout out to Mythos Polyscape 3D, an Etsy artist who makes and sells some of the best 3D printed gnomes we've ever seen.
But not just any gnomes, spooky gnomes. Each one arrives as a blank canvas, allowing you to paint the little guys to your heart's desires.
That's right, Jay. You can paint them however you'd like, as I am basing them off of the movies, or you could paint them neon, rainbow, or even glow in the dark if you have the paint. I bought these ones for myself with the pumpkin head and pinhead being custom ordered, so if you have something in mind that he doesn't have, just reach out to him. Currently, I only have the Jigsaw and Ghostface painted, but I'll be showcasing the rest once they're finished. Now I'd like to point out that this is not a paid promotion. I was just so incredibly satisfied with the gnomes and the customer service provided by Mythos that I felt he deserved a shout out, especially this close to Halloween.
Ooh, show everyone what else he sent, show them!
Thanks for reminding me, Jay. With my order, Mythos added this cute little guy who I've decided to name Grim. Say hello to the nice viewers, Grim.
Hello, motherfucker.
Seriously, Jay? I let you babysit him for one day, and you already taught him to cuss.
Sure did, Sammy boy.
Oh, brother. Anyways, if you're looking for some unique, spooky, and well-designed additions to your Halloween or room decor, then head over to Mythos Polyscape 3D on Etsy. And when you get your order, spread the word, as small businesses get their customers through views and verbal promotion. Alright, back to the character build. Right off the bat, we have a little disclaimer about the build. Hang on to all precious gems, primarily the flawless ones, as they will be definitely needed for this build. Now let's get wrapped up in the webs of her venomous majesty, the Spider Queen.
Our tale begins in Valenwood, the heavily forested country inhabited by all manner of ferocious beasts. Despite the dangers of the land, the Bosmer called it home, including Velma Green. A third cousin to the Bosmer king, Velma Green spent most of her childhood studying alchemy alongside her grandmother. The very concept of combining various ingredients to create a potent potion or deadly poison was fascinating to Velma. Her mother tried her best to keep her focused on her noble blood, but Velma cared little for it. Day after day, her dresses would be soiled in dirt and grime, stained by leaves or mashed bug glands. And day after day, Velma honed her alchemical skills, until that fateful night. The old Merry Dominion had invaded Valenwood to cleanse it. None were safe from the onslaught, including the Greens. First, it was Velma's parents, crushed under the heel of a Thalmor Justiciar. Then, her little siblings were set ablaze, burned to ash before her eyes. Finally, her grandmother, forced to drink several of her own poisons. The Thalmors just stood back and watched, laughing as Velma's grandmother convulsed and coughed up her own blood. her veins bursting from the toxins that had entered her bloodstream. Velma's body shook violently in rage, and before she knew it, she was on top of one of the justiciars, her blade digging into his eye. The soldiers pulled her off, of course, but she kicked herself back into them, causing them to fall back into a terrarium, which unleashed a cluster of arachnids. The 8-legged fiends swarmed over the Thalmor soldiers, biting them hundreds of times over, until they themselves choked on their own blood. As they continued to inject their venom into the Thalmor, Velma fell unconscious. The last image in her mind were those spiders coming towards her. When she finally awoke, Velma was still in the forest of Valenwood, far away from her house. As she sat up, she noticed the hundreds of spiders which surrounded her. The little arachnids had carried Velma away from harm, as it was her and her grandmother who had raised them from birth. To them, she was their mother, their queen. But her reunion with them was short-lived, as the Thalmor Justicia which she had stabbed tracked them down. Without warning, he began burning the spiders with flame spells. Velma got up and began to run, but stopped, looking back at her 8-legged children who charged at the Thalmor. They were dying for her. They were dying for their queen, so that she may escape. And escape she did. Nearly a month had gone by, and Velma was malnourished, weak, and could hardly see. Hallucinations plagued her in her dehydrated state. Images of her grandmother with open arms, or the spiders swarming around Velma's legs to keep her warm, and many other hallucinations followed. Velma was hysterical and could no longer separate reality from her hallucinations. And one day, as she wandered through the wilderness, she saw Imperial soldiers fighting against blue-cloaked soldiers she had never seen before. But there was one person she did recognize, the one-eyed Thalmor whom she had stabbed. His eye was bandaged, and Velma could only see red. Without hesitation, Velma ran into the battlefield. She didn't care if it was a hallucination or not. She needed to kill him. He killed her parents, her siblings, her grandmother, and her 8-legged children. He needed to die. He didn't deserve to live another day. She grabbed a set of daggers from the ground and leapt upon the Thalmor Justicia, repeatedly stabbing him in the eyes and the throat, again and again, all the while she laughed maniacally. She stared down at the blood dripping from her dagger, and she brought the blade to her mouth. Her lips parted, and her tongue extended to the cold steel. Instantly, Velma's eyes snapped open. She could taste it. His blood. Oh, how sweet it was. For months, she had little to eat, but this was a feast she could not pass up. After all, the Green Pact for which her family was named must have been upheld. Ravenously, Velma tore into the Justicia, ripping him apart with her teeth, gulping down his delicious bloody flesh. She sucked out his other eye, cut out his tongue and his heart, eating everything she possibly could. Oh, how marvelous to finally have a full and proper meal. Before she could pick his bones clean, an Imperial soldier knocked Velma in the back of the head with his shield, and she fell unconscious. Days later, she awoke on a cart which took her to Helgen. There, she was asked who she was, but she could hardly remember. That bash in the back of the head did quite a number. She knew that she hated the Thalmor. Hated them. And she remembered that she ate that one, and oh, how she wished to devour more. She recalled the spiders who protected her, and she remembered words about her noble blood. Velma, a voice whispered in her mind. Velma Green. After a moment of recalling all she could, Velma responded with, I am Velma Green, the Spider Queen. Once she had fled Helgen with Rayloff, the Spider Queen began to hone her skills. She started by trying her hand at magic, but could only do so much, mastering alteration and shock magics. However, she was quite skilled with enchanting and mastered every aspect of it. As for stealth and alchemy, she mastered them with ease. Due to her slim physique, she opted for the use of daggers, lightweight and swift. As for the gear used by the Spider Queen, her lack of muscle forced her to wear only clothing, greatly risking her life with open combat. However, her skills with enchanting, alchemy, and alteration worked excellently to correct that flaw, providing mage armors and various alchemical resistances. On her head, she wore the ethereal crown, which allowed her to utilize the powers of both the Atronach and Lordstones. As for her robes, she opted for the robe she took off the body of Titus Mead II, which she enchanted to ensure she could survive any confrontation. In addition to this, she wore the Ring of Namira, which added to her stamina and health regeneration whenever she consumed a corpse. To defend herself, the Spider Queen dual-wielded the Blade of Woe and Mehrunes' Razor, but her greatest assets were her lovely new spiders. Found on the island of the Solstheim, Velma Green uncovered a unique crafting station, which allowed her to create her own amazingly beautiful spiders. From spiders that exploded with lightning, to spiders which controlled the minds of her victims, the Spider Queen truly lived up to her name thanks to her darling babies.
We're going to pause for just a second to tell you where you can obtain the pods required for crafting the spiders. They're found on the corpses of albino spiders, which are located in Fort Frostmoth, Falbathars, High Point Tower, Colborne Barrow, and White Ridge Barrow, where the spider imbuing chamber is located. Now, the pods and spiders do not seem to respawn, at least not in our playthroughs, with one exception. On Solstheim, south of Bloodskull Barrow, and near the Shrine of Kinnereth, you can find an area where more spiders and pods respawn. If you don't feel like grinding too much, make sure you level your Spider Queen's lockpicking early to get the most flawless gems you can. That way, you'll receive double the amount of spiders with each use of the imbuing chamber. And if you really don't want to grind at all, and you don't care for, or you already have all the trophies for Skyrim, then download the Arachnomancy mod and adjust the build to accommodate for spellcasting. Okay, play on.
When it comes to the Spider Queen's choice of champion, there was only one option, the ever-faithful Lydia. Wherever the Spider Queen lacked, Lydia made up for it. Her strength and knowledge of weapons made her the perfect bodyguard for the Spider Queen. As such a valuable asset, the Spider Queen made sure to gift her housecarl with specially enchanted Daedric armor and a Daedric sword, enchanted with absorb health and chaos damage. And now for the gameplay. Early on, Velma was very isolated. She stayed away from the cities and instead spent her time exploring ruins and caves. Eventually, she became more sociable, and would help those who could possibly benefit her. However, her experiments were always in constant progression, even against her so-called friends. When it comes to combat, she prefers to hide in the shadows, lurking like a spider and pouncing only when necessary. She uses home-brewed invisibility potions to conceal her presence and assist in a speedy escape. Should open combat ensue, she'll first send in Lydia and some spiders, giving her enough time to cast an armor spell, such as Dragonhide, her personal favorite. She ferociously dual-wields her daggers, coating them in volatile poisons to better dispatch her enemies. When looking to cause a distraction or increase her numbers in battle, the Spider Queen would use her mind control spiders, usually sneaking up to her target so she doesn't waste a single one of her arachnid babies. Often, times that require such stealth would result in the Spider Queen leaving Lydia behind, as despite the enchantments on her armor, she was somewhat a bit of a noisy klutz. And now for the powers used by Velma Green, the Spider Queen. Arachnid Blitz would be performed by the Spider Queen hurling dead explosive spiders down at her enemies. Her preferred spiders were the poison-based ones, but she would opt for whichever ones would damage her targets the most. Once they did enough damage, she would send in jumping and cloaked spiders to finish the job. Spider's Serenade was enacted by the Spider Queen slowing time. With her targets nearly immobile, she would infect as many enemies as possible with her mind-control spiders, allowing her to forge an army of warriors to aid her in combat for 30 seconds. While her servants fought for her, she would continue to use her cloaked spiders to continue the assault. Should all of her targets be eliminated, leaving only a mind-controlled thrall, she would proceed to sneak up behind them and slit their throat before dining on their sweet, bloody flesh. The Queen's Web would be used against one or more powerful enemies. While sneaking and invisible, the Spider Queen would use mass paralysis to immobilize her enemies. From there, she would unleash 6 deadly cloaked spiders of her choice, and watch as her enemy slowly died from the countless bites from her 8-legged babies. And now for the timeline. After escaping Helgen with the aid of her new friend Ralof, Velma heeded his suggestion and parted ways with him. She traveled westward, eventually stumbling upon the city of Markarth. Once inside the city walls, she felt a strange presence coaxing her towards the palace. Once inside, she met with a priest of Archay who told her that the dead were being eaten by someone or something. Curious, she proceeded into the Hall of the Dead. Much to her surprise, a woman spoke to her and offered her a hand in friendship. Another cannibal, but not one of the Bosma blood, nor did she eat to satisfy the Green Pact, but ate for sheer pleasure. That day the Spider Queen feasted on the blood and flesh of a priest of Archay, and that feast revived a portion of her memory. The Thalmor Justicia, that vile man who murdered everyone she ever loved, that vile man who was so juicy and sweet. Her mouth salivated at the thought of devouring him. Oh, how she wished she could do it again. Unfortunately, she was not strong enough to take on an able-bodied Justiciar on her own, especially since they were so advanced with magic. Eager to discover their weakness, Velma asked bartenders and traders about magic, quickly being directed towards the College of Winterhold. Unfortunately, Velma was not very skilled in the arcane arts, aside from alteration, enchanting, and a few lightning spells. But she had obtained enough knowledge to aid her in her experiments. She began breaking into ancient barrows, looting chests and corpses alike. She took valuable items and would eventually take them to traders to sell. Her time in the shadows of various barrows, caves, and Blackreach led Velma to becoming a master in stealth and lockpicking. With her constant bartering with the traders above, she also developed a silver tongue. Though haggling was still a bit of a trick for her, intimidation and persuasion flew off her tongue with ease. As she became more accustomed to the shadows of the underworld, Velma Green began to travel to the top world only at night, and quickly began to experiment on unsuspecting citizens. While in the depths of Blackreach, Velma had come across a laboratory which belonged to a high elf known as Sindarian. Since he was no longer using it, she made herself at home. She spent countless hours experimenting with the ingredients she found in the lab, throughout Blackreach and around the areas she visited on the top world. One area of particular interest was the island northeast of Skyrim, Solstheim. The island held many unique ingredients for various poisons and potions, but the most important items she found there were the spiders. Within one of the burrows she explored, Velma discovered a Dunmer mage who had fused albino spiders with various magical properties. Such marvelous beauties they were, but wasted in the hands of the Dunmer mage. Once the Dunmer was dead, Velma began crafting as many spiders as she could, forming a complete arsenal of loyal eight-legged babies. With her various concocted poisons and her arsenal of arachnids, the Spider Queen began to experiment on those previously mentioned unsuspecting citizens. Sometimes they would be paralyzed, and sometimes they would die instantly, or be sent into a violent rage. Sometimes nothing would happen at all, and they would become hostile towards her. But one in particular, piqued her interest. The little spider with big black eyes, all just like a puppy. They latch on to her victims and take over their mind. Such loyal darlings. Anyway, one such night of experimentation led her to becoming a member and eventual listener for the Dark Brotherhood. While lurking in the shadows of Riften, Velma entered into the Honor Hall orphanage. The woman in charge was a wicked, cruel hag who looked so much like her beloved grandmother. How dare this vile woman wear my grandmother's face? Velma thought to herself. To fix this, she used one of her most potent poisons she had to kill the old woman. Afterwards, Velma died on her old, stringy meat. She wasn't very tasty, but she still provided some nutrients. After mutilating and cannibalizing Grelod the Kind, something unexpected happened. The children began jumping around and cheering and praising the Dark Brotherhood. Curious as to what the Dark Brotherhood was, Velma decided to ask around, but only one man seemed to have any information on them. Maul. He told her about Aventus Aretino, who returned to his home in Windhelm, and so Velma made her way there. After speaking with the boy and receiving his payment for Grelod's death, Velma decided that it was time to explore the top world a bit more. She started with Riverwood, the town that Ralof had mentioned after Helgen. Once there, she spoke with Gerda, Ralof's sister, who sent her to Whiterun to tell the Jarl about the dragon attack. Unsurprisingly, the news of the dragon attack caused the city to close its gates and permit no entry. Telling the gods that Riverwood called for the Jarl's aid made them see reason to permit Velma to enter. Not long after speaking with the Jarl, Velma was sent back to Riverwood, this time to Bleakfall's Barrow, one of the few barrows she had not yet investigated. She obtained the Dragonstone and returned it to Farengar, only to be sent soon after into a fight against a fierce dragon. After the beast fell, Velma absorbed its soul and discovered a new ability, the Thuum. After speaking with Jarl Balgruth, Velma wasted no time in heading to High Hrothgar with her new companion Lydia. Having a servant bound by honor and oath jogged some memories within Velma. Memories of her mother speaking of royal duties and royal blood. Not long after returning to Riverwood to retrieve the horn of Jurgen Windcaller, Velma and Lydia fell under attack by some strange cultists. After that, Velma decided they were deserving of a proper rest. Immediately after renting the attic room, Velma laid down and went to sleep. When she awoke, however, she was no longer in the Sleeping Giant Inn, but in a cold, damp cabin. A woman in black and red sat atop a dresser and spoke of Grelod, and how she was, by right, a Dark Brotherhood target. Of course, Velma was eager to join, after all. They seemed like her kind of people. In between contracts, she returned to the Greybeards and to Delphine, further strengthening her dragonborn powers, as well as visiting the Dawnstar Museum, which led her to obtaining the infamous blade, Mehrunes Razor. About a week or so after joining the Dark Brotherhood, Velma became the Listener, which greatly displeased Astrid. So much so that she was single-handedly responsible for nearly eradicating the Dark Brotherhood for good. After returning the Dark Brotherhood to their former glory, Velma ventured off towards Solstheim to track down the man known as Mirak. She eventually discovered the ancient Dragonborn hiding in the realm of oblivion known as Apocrypha. He was incredibly powerful, too powerful for her to face. She tried to kill more dragons than she had, but Mirak began stealing those souls for himself. So she sought after other ways to defeat him. She started with a legend she had once read about, the Ethereum Forge. Eventually finding the forge and collecting enough Ethereum, the Spider Queen fashioned a crown, which she used to greatly enhance her resistance to physical and magical attacks. Afterwards, she returned to Solstheim and began to explore more, eventually obtaining all the black books of Hermaeus Mora, and eventually the dragon aspect shout. Once the mighty Dragonborn was defeated, and all the souls he had collected, including his own, entered into the Spider Queen, she began her plot for dominion. With the power from Apocrypha and her own Dragonborn blood, with the means to create an army of spiderlings, and her own curiosity on creating even more powerful ones, the Spider Queen knew her time had come. She entered into the Civil War, siding with the Stormcloaks, who shared her deep hatred for the Thalmor. Unfortunately, Jarl Balgruuf, a man she knew and trusted, would not join the rebellion, and thus she had no choice but to remove him from power. Soon after, the other Imperial supporting cities fell to the Stormcloaks, and finally it was time for solitude. General Tullius fell to her spiders before Ulfric could claim the glory for killing him. Not long after, the Spider Queen realized that Alduin, the World Eater, was still a devastating threat to her plans. She killed not only the great tyrant of old, but his former second-in-command, Paarthurnax. Though he claimed to resist his inborn nature to deceive and destroy, the Spider Queen knew she could not trust him. Once all of the dragons had submitted to her will at the throat of the world, the Spider Queen set the final stages of her plan in motion. The Civil War was over. Alduin was a tale of her victory, and Mirak was but a common footnote. The Spider Queen had brought peace to Skyrim, but her conquest was not yet over. The Thalmor still held power over the Empire, which conveniently enough had a vacancy in the seat of power. With the Dark Brotherhood at her command, the Spider Queen sent her 3 best assassins to investigate the situation of Cyrodiil, while she prepared her babies for the next stage of her plan. She had not spoken to the Greybeard since she murdered Paarthurnax, and there was no doubt in her mind that they were furious with her. But that was of no matter. With the help of her latest creation, the Spider Queen erased them of all free will. Arngir, Wulfgar, Borri, and Einath were her secret weapons, her ultimate protectors. You see, the Spider Queen had worked tirelessly to create a mind control spider that would grant her full control over an individual. For not merely a few seconds, but an eternity. Fueled by her own blood and Bend will shout, the Spider Queen's new control master spiders bore into the Greybeards' heads, latching onto their brains and connecting to their central nervous system, transforming them into her permanent, obedient slaves. Afterwards, she approached High King Ulfric and explained how the rest of Tamriel needed to be liberated from the Thalmor, but she couldn't do it alone. She asked him to support her in her campaign to become Empress. Although he could not have won the civil war without her help, and he said as such, Ulfric said he would never bend the knee to an elf. She tried to be civil and reasonable, but Ulfric was a stubborn man and could not be reasoned with. Though she had wished for an honest friendship, the Spider Queen much preferred Ulfric to be her obedient slave. After all, he couldn't betray her with one of her precious babies inside his head. His generals and captains were also infected, ensuring none would betray her. As she prepared Odahviing to spread her message to the other obedient dragons, Babette came bearing news of Cyrodiil. A new emperor had indeed been chosen, a strong military leader, and puppet for the Thalmor. The Spider Queen thought a moment, then handed Babette one of her control master spiders. She instructed her to take it, and when the emperor was sleeping, set it carefully on his pillow. Babette left and did as instructed once she gained entry to the White Gold Tower. Upon her return to Skyrim, Babette was astonished to see dozens of dragons, all armored and equipped with large sacks on their sides. The Spider Queen had envoys spread word to Cyrodiil about her coming. How she, the Dragonborn, rightful Empress of Tamriel, chosen by Akatosh, was coming to Cyrodiil. This, of course, made the Thalmor nervous, but they were confident in their puppet. While the Spider Queen and her dragons waited high in the mountains, High King Ulfric and his generals marched their armies into Cyrodiil, bearing the Spider-Dragon banner of the Spider Queen. Many cheered in the streets as Ulfric and his generals shouted, "Make way for the Dragonborn Empress!" Some ran, and as Ulfric and his army approached the capital of Cyrodiil, they were greeted by an imperial army and Thalmors with them. The Thalmor were pleased. They knew Ulfric's army could not defeat the Empire and Thalmor together. However, they did not expect what happened next. The Emperor raised his sword, giving the order to attack. But his soldiers did not charge at Ulfric. Instead, they turned against the Thalmor, who were on the field with them, and slew them instead. The Thalmor ambassadors were terrified and perplexed. How could their most loyal puppet betray them? As horns sounded throughout Cyrodiil, more Imperials began turning against the Thalmor, slaughtering them without mercy. Once the Thalmor were destroyed, the Spider Queen flew down to the city on the back of Odahviing, and all in the city were amazed. She marched into the White Gold Tower, with the Greybeards at her side, and Ulfric and his generals at her back. Once in the main hall, she took her seat upon the dragon throne. All bowed before her, but in the weeks to come, the Thalmor assembled their own armies and marched upon the White Gold Tower. Nearly every Thalmor soldier and justiciar in Tamriel were there amongst the army. But as before, they did not expect the Spider Queen's actions. She did not send out any of her warriors, and she did not close the gates to the city to prepare for a siege. No, she sent her dragons. The Thalmor were terrified, but their mages projected a powerful ward around the entire army, one that can most certainly repel the attacks of dragon's breath. However, the dragons did not breathe their fire. Instead, Those who rode upon their backs pulled on strings which opened the bags which hung from their sides, unleashing thousands of Control Master spiders from each sack. Perplexed, the Thalmor did nothing, confused as to what was falling from the sky. By the time the spiders landed, it was too late. Every soldier and justiciar were infected, their minds, bodies, and souls bound to the Spider Queen's indomitable will. Through the telepathy she shared with the spiders, the Spider Queen commanded the Thalmor to return to their respective holds throughout Tamriel, and once they were there, to exterminate every Thalmor and Ultima who were not infected. Once her first order was completed, the Spider Queen ordered them to demolish the buildings they had erected in the name of the Old Merry Dominion, and to kill every man, woman, and child high elves they could find who were not infected. Once that was completed, they were to eat their victims, then kill themselves. As before, they obeyed without question, without hesitation. The Old Merry Dominion was no more, the Ultima race itself extinct. Once the horrors of what had been done were made public, there was unrest in the Empire, especially in Cyrodiil. Many who had once welcomed the thought of the return of the Dragonborn dynasty now feared the one who sat upon the throne. But as before, the Spider Queen was prepared for any uprisings. She did not intend to rule over an empire of men and myrrh. No, she desired to rule over an empire of children. Her children. With bags filled with new spiders, the Spider Queen sent her dragons out across all of Tamriel. Through the use of alteration, alchemy, and Babette's vampiric blood, the Spider Queen created a second unique species of spider, one that would do more than command the minds of those infected. These new spiders were small and crawled or chewed their way into the brains, as the mind control master spiders had. But these affected the body differently. Every man, woman, and child underwent a painful transformation. Their eyes split and formed more, their legs splintered, and their abdomens swelled. Their jaws split apart, and their skin became hard and segmented. By the end of the 3-day metamorphosis, all of Tamriel had been transformed into arachne, spider-mortal hybrids, all bound through a hive mind to their empress, who injected a serum into her neck, which transformed her as well. Unlike her subjects, however, she was larger, faster, and most importantly, immortal. It is currently the 10,000th year of the 5th era, or the Spider Age as we call it. Today, we celebrate the legendary ascension of our beloved Empress. And today, dear viewer, she has chosen you as her main course. What an envious honor it is.
We hope you enjoyed our latest character build, Velma Green, the Spider Queen. If you did, then please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell icon to be notified of our next video. And in case you missed it earlier, go check out Mythos Polyscape 3D on Etsy. I guarantee you won't be disappointed.
Happy Halloween, everybody! We'll see you all here next time on the Morbid Veil.